Yes, please take a seat at the podium. Mr. Hussam Abdul Ghani, who we just listened to a very nice presentation. May I please invite you also to join us? From HAG Architects, he just introduced himself, so I think still fresh. Mika Pawelka, also introduced this morning from Priedeman. He's the Managing Director for the Middle East office. Osman Ashraf is a Senior Quantity Surveyor for Saudi Consulting Services. Is he couldn't make it? Okay, then we also have Abdullah Quadri, also a Senior Architect from TIPSA. Could you please join us also on the podium? So our topic today is about energy codes, ratings, and guidelines for facades. If you don't mind, I would like to ask you some questions about that, and then we can later open also the topic to the delegates for their questions also. I'd like to start with Abdullah. What are the main ways we can have a sustainable facade? What does it mean for you, a sustainable facade? Is it a matter of what materials we use, what is the design, how the building is maybe positioned? What makes it sustainable? Can you give us an idea?
Bismillah. Hello everyone, my name is Abdullah. As he introduced, I'm the Senior Architect from TIPSA. According to me, it totally depends on the design, how you are orienting the building, how you are massing the building. Because as soon as you design and implement the design of the orientation and the massing, you get the idea or concept for the facade. So when you are designing the facade, you need to think about the energy, you need to think about the daylight, you need to think about the ventilation. So when you are designing the building in the first stage of the design, concept design, you will understand how the massing and orientation is going to help you in the facade design. If you check the energy coding that's used, and that can be saved by facade design, it's about 40% from the total building performance. Yeah, so good design will be a sustainable design afterwards. So if you design a facade, well, I think Mr. Wagner and Mr. helped us to understand the ideas that the different kinds of formulations or techniques in the facade can help us achieve sustainable performance for the building itself. Right now, as we see in most of the skylines, we see a facade which is plain and simple facades. They are just there. Even if we use the highest green-rated materials, the sustainability cannot be approached because it's helping us, but we are not. We are importing from maybe UK, Germany, a glass that is not locally provided. And hence we are losing a lot of cost, a lot of time in this matter. If we are doing the location wise, if we are importing locally, we are reducing the energy that is consumed, the money that is consumed, the time that is consumed to a significant lower estimate. Now when we design the facade, can understand the location, how we can use the location to help our building by performing a significant number of research on this. For example, if a building in UK is similar to the building in Saudi, it won't happen because the design factors that should be included are not considered. As the temperature, as the weather conditions are totally different. There was a research done recently where it was shown that in UK, approximately 1.3 million birds died in the migrating season due to the reflections that are shown by the facade. The sky, the environment of the green plants, and due to the collision. So the same thing applied in Saudi Arabia, not migrating in this area. So you can understand the different factors that are going on here. So it is very, very important that an architect should implement all the beneficial factors that is locally available to them.
And this would bring the question of the cost. If you say locally, so is this also saving costs? I mean,
Yes.
what are the additional costs I have to take if I'm a customer, just to say that I have a sustainable building, or if I'm conscious, what additional cost does it implicate on my project?
See, if you employ the local techniques that are used already here, if you look at the vernacular architecture as an example for your design, it will reduce the cost no less than 15 to 20% of the whole project. Because now you are designing the performance of the building itself. The facade will help in maintaining the project also.
Okay, thank you. I will pick on this point with Mika to say, because you touched an important point. Are we using the same systems, the same facade systems that are in Europe, using UK, for example, anywhere else, and just importing them here and saying, copy paste, and this is working? Mika, is it the case, or are we really seeing designs which are designed specifically for our climate and our region with the needs here?
I think you touched a very important point. I mean, if we talk about LEED and rating and all this kind of stuff, and how sustainable are our facades and the material, I would say a facade in terms of LEED rating is pretty easy. Huh? You source it locally, and you have the most points you can get. That's very
easy. If it's a matter of points.
Exactly. Okay, so that's a pretty easy approach. But your approach it's much more wider. Okay, so it starts much earlier. How we design. Does it make sense to design a huge glass high-rise building and then put all the efforts in insulating it to get rid of the sun?
You showed us a very nice glass box.
And then the lead approach is that you source the rock wool locally and the aluminum extrusion, and right? I mean, this is actually the approach. So the approach is much wider, and you touched the point actually. Okay. The importing issue is, of course, it's a big issue of sustainable. Okay, what is the
carbon footprint, for example,
exactly. What is the
to bring it all the way here?
Footprint? And this, I think, the Middle East did a big advanced step over the last years. You can get the extrusion locally. You can get the thermal broken. Your material is Technoform is locally. You have double and triple silver coatings in glass available. Soon we're gonna get jumbo size glasses available, so we don't have to go to Europe anymore for 7 and 8 meter glasses. So everything is actually locally available in terms of sourcing the material, I would say. That's definitely.
What about the workmanship and the installation? Is it useful if I do something locally and then it's not installed properly, like you showed us some interesting pictures?
Clear, but see,
is that sustainable?
This question does not really arise because nobody will bring a labor from Europe to do this, okay? We have to find the right tools and the right system to teach the people and to control the execution. And we have very good examples also in Riyadh that we have fabulous buildings where clients and people care very much, and you can see this actually here. So it can be done with the right approach and the right people, the right team, the right consultant, the right stakeholders, then it can be definitely executed here.
Hussam, if I'm not mistaken, you did some studies in sustainability, right?
Yeah, I recently accomplished my master degree in sustainable design and built environment. Yeah.
So do we need on-site and energy efficiency and sustainability consultant? As we use, let's say, a facade consultant, do we need also a sustainability consultant?
I think the sustainability is basically the responsibility of the entire design team. It's not one person task. It's the entire design team, and it is a culture. You cannot actually live unsustainable life while you are doing sustainability in your work. It's basically a culture, and we inherited this sustainability terminology from Europe and States, and we applied here, and we still apply it here as per the code. We don't believe in sustainability in our daily work, and up till we believe in it properly and we believe in it honestly, we will find out that sustainable buildings and sustainable designs are much cheaper than non-sustainable designs and non-sustainable buildings. It's true, and it's experimented, and it's a fact. Normally, when the client comes to us and say, if I want to have a LEED silver in my building, how much money I have to pay percentage-wise of the construction cost? We always say it's between 5 to 10% if it's silver, if it's gold. However, this is totally wrong. Sustainable design is cheaper. Sustainable buildings is cheaper. Just briefly, sustainability means that the building uses less materials and uses less energy as well. So with less materials and less energy, the result is definitely cheaper building. So if we approach it this way, definitely it will be much cheaper. Again, the environmental consultant, he is important, but not to deliver the project or to dictate the strategies on the design team, but to educate the design team and spread the more of awareness within the organizations which don't have this capacity in their daily work. So their role is more helpful in this area, not to be responsible of delivering a sustainable building.
So if I understand, it's more of a mindset. Not
more of a
boxes to tick, like we said in the lead, you have to tuck, tuck, tuck. Now I have a
No.
sustainable building.
No.
It's a way of thinking, and it starts, I suppose, from the beginning.
Correct.
From the design with the architect, at every step, at the materials, at the selection, in every step.
Yeah, and spread all over the all designers and engineers as well.
However, you touched a point about the codes, and we have listed here some of the codes which at least I found prevailing at the moment for our area here in the GCC. Why, first of all, do we have so many different, even let's say in UAE, within the same country, you have different rating systems for, as you said, gold or platinum or silver. Why don't we have a common one? I mean, there is something called GSAS, the Gulf Standard Association. Why don't we use one? Why do we have each one different?
To be honest, I'm not worried about any of them. I mean, either to have a common code for all GCC countries or to have different codes for GCC countries, it doesn't matter. As long as each one achieve the target of it, it's fine. For example, if you look at states, for example, they have NFPA and they have the IPC in the same country. IPC and NFPA, of course, NFPA is considered as fire code, but IPC also refers to and they put a fire code which is somehow different from NFPA. So no harm to have two different codes for the same thing for the same country, as long as we know exactly the target of this code to be implemented. Again, it could be useful if we have one common code for environmental design for all GCC, so allows actually the designers to be more familiar, to have good understanding and to implement it properly, but it doesn't harm to have different ones.
Maybe Mahmoud can add something on that, why we follow so many. And I mean, for the Saudi code, it's also quite complex, these degree days and calculations.
Yeah, the Saudi code has been through actually a lot and started in 2007. And now we are at the second round of producing an updated version. Of
Still not out yet.
No, still.
Okay.
It was issued actually for all the consultants to use it, for all the governmental agency to use it.
Mandatory?
It is mandatory, and it is used now as a reference for certain elements, but at the moment, as we are aware of, and we're working with some of the governmental sectors on developing this building, Saudi building code, further and further, and it will be branched into multiple areas. However, the Saudi building code is servicing an almost a continent. You've got the eastern province, you've got desert weather, you've got mountains.
Different climatic zones.
Different climatics. So to go back and follow GCC code, it's not going to be fair to all the different areas that we have in Saudi here.
That makes sense, but between Abu Dhabi and Dubai, the climatic zone for me is the same. I mean,
I practiced most of my life.
yeah, I'm just saying.
Sure
I reside in Dubai, but I still don't understand the difference.
So looking at the codes, as I agree with my colleague here, as long as there are parameters that we're following and there are things that we're looking up to achieve, I think that's the bottom line. Right now we're trying actually to talk about LEED. LEED is a system, it's not the sustainability system. Saudi Arabia has its own initiatives to create their own systems. We don't follow really necessarily LEED. The projects that we worked on, whether KFD or other or CAS or all these projects that we have in Saudi here, they followed LEED in absence of having a local system that
The mindset.
yes, that put you on the mindset.
But nevertheless, let's say we have these codes, and you said they're mandatory. Who is checking that? Is it you are saying, yes, I did, I fulfilled, or does somebody come from, I don't know, the electricity company, from the municipality, from who is checking that? And what is the penalty? Maybe you don't get a link to the electric grid unless you, I don't know.
Just to clarify, are we talking about the local systems?
Okay. Yes, Saudi.
It's not, as we said, it's under development, it's not yet implemented in full
Okay.
when it comes to the sustainability systems. But civil defense, for example, is an authority that you have to deal with, and they have their references for codes, and they're very, very strict about it. Civil aviation also, they have their own requirements when you design high-rise buildings. So there are actually authorities, municipalities, ATA, now the Ministry of Finance with their new big land project that they're developing next to the airport. All of these, they have their own actually laws and bylaws that you have to stick to.
I agree, they have. But are they checking after execution? I mean, do you submit just your design and say, yes, it follows the requirements? Or is somebody coming to site and checking you actually accomplished?
Of course, I mean, an occupancy permit, which allows you actually to hook up to the systems.
Also to the energy efficiency.
The energy, the water, all of these things are related to this defense approval. And that's mandatory.
Mika,
No,
for UAE, it's
No,
also
I mean,
they are checking that?
In general, that's always the big question, okay? We design something in theory, we have standards, U value, I don't know, 1.9, 2.1, whatever it is. This is actually a guideline to reduce the carbon footprint of a building system we developed all together, which is not sustainable, okay? So, I mean, the sustainability aspect and these guidelines, I think, is two different things, okay? If we would design sustainability buildings, probably we don't need these guidelines because we will anyway achieve them, okay?
Yes.
And at the end, this is a theoretical guideline. Always the question is, how is my building perform later on? So if my U value, if I have to achieve 1.99, let's say I achieve 1.75, everybody will say, best
Good job.
design, okay? Until you do the commissioning, you do the test, and then you realize your
Everything's
building is a
leaking.
Swiss cheese and you have air leakage in 200. We experienced this, okay? So
I
as
believe it.
long as, I agree, civil defense is working, civil aviation is working, even in UAE. Other things you can test, as long as you do not have in the law a commissioning to ensure that your building is performing the way it should perform. This is always, it's not ensured, I have to say. And what will happen at the end? The bill, the theoretical U value is 1.75, but to the air leakage it's actually 3.5. The bill you will pay because you bought the flat or you are the tenant, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
but this was a little bit my question. Who is checking that it's true that it was designed for 175 and you actually did it? Is the facade consultant looking for Swiss cheese or not?
I would say by law there is no system implemented that you need to do the commissioning at the end. We are working on this, and third party assignment is the first part that you can do at least benchmark checks that it's installed, okay? But if 100% of the envelope is performing, you can only test with the commissioning. There is no law to do
Is
so.
Istidama, for example, coming with a thermal camera and measuring?
No.
No.
Sorry, this is actually, it depends on your package as a designer. When you send something out to the contractors, usually the performance test is a mandatory requirement by the site supervision engineer. Contractor has to hire a third party to monitor, witness, and sign off PMU inspection. And that's something that is required contractually. Otherwise, in the future, if there is any problem with the building, you can go back to that third party and the contractor and go after it. Especially when it comes to water tightness or wind loading or fire rating, all of these tests are listed in your contract.
Hussam, you showed us earlier in your presentation the Empire State Building versus the chart, let's say. And as you said, rightfully, in 100 years, not much changed aesthetically, at least in architecture. What about this sustainability point? Do you think there has been advancements, or were we building maybe better before without even knowing it? Is the Empire State Building for you a sustainable building versus what we do today, or not?
Even if it's sustainable, the, the need for time being is totally different from the need of 100 years. And the technology which is available now is totally different from what has been designed before. Even the structure system, 100 years is totally different from what we are experiencing now. So it's basically, and this is the definition of technology. It's the best use of the current methods of construction or others based on the available technology. So it's basically, even if it was perfectly sustainable, the need for sustainability, if I design the Empire State now, I will take another 100 measures to be more sustainable.
And what is the typical process, let's say, from the beginning? If you said it's a mindset, of course, that is clear. But the process of designing and tendering a specialty design and building, which we wanted to be sustainable, is there a certain process, or it's just like you said, to have the mindset there and work all together?
Yeah, the basic, of course, the knowledge of the entire team is one. Second is the continuous learning process within the organization is another thing. I always think that R&D is very important for engineering companies and also architecture companies as well, because it's very important to develop your ways of designing and also the materials and products and technologies and techniques you are using in your designs continuously. It's not about fixed systems and using it forever. And that's exactly what I meant by modular architecture and modular design. Because when you design a module, you are basically running an R&D on this module to perform perfectly for, you studied properly for a couple of years, let's say, and you will multiply it for 4, 5, 6 years. So the intensive study for the module will allow for higher quality and better sustainability for that module, which is not the case for the normal conventional design process. You design from scratch every single project. So this will not allow you to have enough time to study your project and every single component of it properly. But on a modular approach, you will design it efficiently as an R&D project, and then you can apply it on 10 projects. So this is basically the right process for designing to achieve real sustainability.
There is an important part I want to add, and this is something where we experience, we can see a difference, for example, in the market in Saudi Arabia to some other GCC states who is more investment driven, okay? Somebody who is investing or is building on demand is looking into more of the life cycle cost of his building than somebody who is just investing it. And we can see a difference here in Saudi Arabia. This approach is much more available here, that people look into the life cycle cost of a building and not purely looking what is my
I'll sell it, then I don't care what happens.
Exactly.
Just to build on that, the capital cost of construction for a building is around 5 to 10% of the life cycle costing of that building, meaning 90% of the cost of the building is coming out of the operation. So when you design the mechanical system efficiently, when you design the structure system efficiently, all of that will return back on 90% of the overall cost.
Abdullah, what's your opinion about that? Do you agree?
Actually, I wanted to add the same point. The operation, when we are building a building, we are just thinking of the capital, the initial budget that we are going to finance the building with and construct it. But the end user is the one who is going to have the building and who is going to operate the building, and he will be the one suffering whether it be in the cost, whether it be in the comforts of physical or visual, or how can I say, sound, noise pollution in that way. So I think at the end user, we are all contractors and consultants here, and we are usually thinking about the initial cost, we are thinking about the material, but we are hardly focusing on the end user and what kind of function it is. I've seen many buildings that are designed for one function and later on used another function, totally changing the initial concept. So when an architect is designing any building, he's usually thinking the building of the function will be this, and the end user is going to change it to a complete different. So the building is not going to perform, and hence he will be suffering the whole time. And we have to consider this, whether it's in the buying of the building or in that way. So as I was saying earlier, it is in the initial stage that we should decide what we are going to make. And as you said, the principle of a good design is principle of a sustainable design, period. So no matter what you are designing, if it's a good design, it will be sustainable for life. The performance of the building will automatically improve if the end user knows the actual function of the building, and the cost will drastically reduce.
We'll have questions. We will try to pick up a little bit or continue what we were discussing. One of the questions which we were also asked to discuss is the thermal performance in curtain wall and fenestrations. Mika, we discussed before about European systems versus local systems, but from the direction of a carbon footprint and how we produce it here, and you said this is happening now, to avoid, let's say, wastage and importing and being sustainable in that direction. Now, I want to ask the same question, but in terms of systems which are, let's say, designed for European climate versus here. Are we just using those here, or are we actually designing specific for this region?
No, I mean, specific for this region, I would not say. Systems are somehow adjustable. And this is what the system suppliers are actually doing. I mean, in Europe, you have for sure definitely thermal broken system. And here you can somehow still manage without in certain areas, but it's coming more and more. That's why I think system suppliers more and more change even to be able to do thermal broken system here, better ones. Okay, we are designing the first project in Dubai now with a facade U value of 0.93. So that's pretty much outstanding for the region, I have to say.
Yes.
But we are sourcing it locally with a huge, huge effort.
Maybe I was thinking more, let's say, sand trap. You don't need a sand trap in Europe. Do we do things like this here for specific?
Yeah, but that's why system suppliers, they adjust their system for the local need. But you know how is the situation. A curtain wall in the Middle East is costing between 3 and 5 times less than in Europe, okay? So things need to be adjusted. You need to extrude it here locally by following the quality requirement of a system supplier.
And,
Please.
So we're really happy with what we're seeing right now, especially after the last 10 years where the development of the ZAK system in Saudi is picking up. We start seeing actually local manufacturers, local installers, and start seeing international companies coming to this region and start manufacturing glass, extruding profiles, bringing their expertise to our area, which I think is helping a lot the way that the future is going to be. Going back to the subject of being specific about design, we like to think about the facade system of a building as a skin, as the human skin. It's created in a very sophisticated system, but yet you need to protect it, you need to maintain it, you need to make sure that it works well. And this is where the system that you're designing has actually to work where you are. In our region, we know beside actually the harsh weather, there's dust that accumulates always. That means your cleaning requirements might be actually higher demand than normal.
Like the 24/7 robot, which Nika showed us.
So you're going to come with ideas that can actually combine solutions, and maybe you've seen what actually system where you're shading some of your facades, or majority of your facade. At the same time, you use that system to clean the building, and we reached a 20 days cycle in a high-rise tower, 385 meters, which is something that can help.
Could you give us a few examples of really sustainable or truly sustainable buildings in Saudi or even in GCC, let's say? I know you are more specific to this country, but...
Yes. Looking at one of the projects that I consider close to my heart is the Palace and the DQ. This is a very, very sustainable project. Even before the sensibility was invited, it was built in 1985. The way we look at it is you use what is available next to you. You shield your wastes. You open your windows where the sun does not hit it. So these are the main principles of design. And I agree with my colleague here. It's not really going after scores and systems. It's the motive inside the design. If I'm designing for, I know that I'm out there, so it can reach to 64 in the shade sometimes, then my system has to cater for that. You have to be aware of, you're not just bringing systems that are sophisticated. Mika mentioned something really advanced about using special profiles and special glazing system, but that comes with a cost. The tag price is going to be extreme. So you have to work together with the systems and the budget.
I think if all architects were thinking like you here, then we wouldn't need codes, because the codes are there to make sure that everybody thinks like that.
I mean, look at the Radisson Hotel, which Michal showed. I think that's a perfect example. And I don't think so this is something expensive.
Yes,
I do not see this. The shape of the building is done in a very, very smart way, and it does not look extremely expensive. I don't think so that you have a massive budget problem.
The best thing about it that you shaded your glass, and you gained up to 30% in heat loss, heat gain actually. You saved that, so your mechanical system worked with. A new project that we looked at recently, we reached 50% actually in heat gain using the shading professions. And that's by introducing architectural elements. We're not just talking about...
Yes, we are also going to talk about shading techniques, but just also, Abdullah, if you can say,
I wanted to add the point where we need to look at vernacular architecture and see what kind of passive systems that were installed in that time, and that still can be implemented now in our designs. Many of the passing solar and ventilation codes we can just follow, not the codes, I mean the standards, that the techniques that we're using. Yeah, the practice that they were practicing when designing these buildings, using mud breaks or what kind of different kind of heights in massing. So in this way, as you said, it will be in a lower budget and much more sustainable in that sense. And as he said, it is all long before LEEDs or any other sustainable system came along. But these were systems that were implemented due to regional situations, climatic conditions, and all the challenges that were faced in Saudi, not only in Saudi, in any other region in the world. Every region has their own climatic conditions and their own climatic challenges, and which have to be met in order to get the perfect building out of the system.
Yes, please.
Beside all these factors that we're about techniques, is your ability to have the right contractors to do the job. And this is something that during the last, I would say, 20 years, we've noticed actually an increased skills.
Improvement.
Yes.
Good.
Actually, contractors who can actually come up with solutions. And we're talking about small size buildings, not talking about KFD towers that we worked on and all these things. I'm talking about smaller size buildings where you start getting actually local installers who are really well trained and they can do a good job. This is the trend that we're pushing forward. This is the sort of contractors that we would like, because they are our partners. At the end of the day, you're not going to secure the design and our contractor can build.
There's a building which comes to my mind, which I'm sure was designed to be really sustainable, and I don't know if it's in fact being used that way. The Bahrain financial tower with the
tower with the
windmills. I have a feeling these windmills never work, or is it? Am I mistaken? It was the idea is great for generation of power by wind, and but every time I'm there, I look and I ask my friends who live there, is it working? He said, no, it never works. So what's the point?
Okay, just to be fair with the design.
Sorry, I don't know
it's
who
not-
designed
it's
or
not-
did
it's
that.
not my
I'm
design.
just saying, as a
It's that
guy walking on the
instance.
street observing.
It's not my design, so I will not defend it, but it actually raised a very important point. The infrastructure system for Bahrain wasn't ready to receive such a building, meaning the building was designed in a way to have the wind turbines running when the electricity when the wind is capable of running the wind turbines to feed the building itself, and when the electricity exceeds certain amount, it goes to the grid. However, the grid in Bahrain doesn't allow to have or to receive the electricity.
Okay.
So the infrastructure itself doesn't help the building to function properly.
And they don't have storage, let's say, cells?
No, because basically the main cost of any active renewable energy source is in storage, not in the elements themselves.
Creating.
Yeah.
So you would say it's a failed sustainable building?
No,
The intent is good,
I don't see that. It's basically, I consider it as a successful project on the way to guide the next one to be designed properly. It's
Or
very,
that
very
the-
important. It's very good example of a wind turbine building or wind turbine integrated in a building, but it's not the ideal one. It's not the optimum one.
Or meanwhile, maybe the grid is enhanced in a way to accept the input of
Let's
this
look
power.
at Dubai, for example. They are developing the infrastructure to encourage customers to
With solar power. And
exactly to use PV panels or whatever, because they know that once they open the grid to receive,
it's going to come.
of course, it has its own risks of electricity pollution and all of that, but they are basically changing the meters for the houses to encourage users to install PV panels on their houses. I think the same issue which Dubai is facing for time being in terms of shortage in energy, all of us are facing in many countries. So a political decision like that will help designers to basically develop the design better. Yeah.
Okay. Yes?
We are designing right now the biggest zero net energy office building. I don't know if it's on the world. They claim to be. Okay, I cannot say names, but just
What location?
just a
City?
few. GCC.
In GCC.
Just a few. That the design change because of the requirement of photovoltaic integrated is massively, and we didn't expect, or the client didn't expect this, okay? From a tiny roof up till a massive construction, okay?
bigger
And,
surface.
or things like, I remember a budget when the investor introduced this and he said we're gonna spend 15 to 20% more because of this. I thought probably 150 to 200% more. And this is actually the delay we are facing now because they have to double the budget simply, okay?
I hope they will not back up due
I
to
hope it will
finance.
happen. I'm always afraid somebody will come at the end and say, you know, for security
much.
reason, we can only manage 85% or something like this. But let's see, it's a huge learning curve and probably it will be also a statement if we are able to do this, but the challenge is huge, huge.
Challenge for
The last point on our topics to allow some time for questions is about dynamic shading techniques. As architects, did you work on such projects where your shading was, or you had external elements to help in the, let's say, green building aspect of
I think it's very sophisticated for the market and for the GCC building industry, to be honest. I know that there are some examples of, again, not fully successful projects in Abu Dhabi, the Bahar Tower.
Yeah.
Again, it was designed in a way to function properly. However, due to the dust and humidity and all of that, doesn't help the mechanical
parts
elements and parts to function as expected. So things like that are very important as learning curve to learn from, to enhance our designs. But there's a long way to go, let's say. So in my designs, in the projects I participated in, I tried to avoid having any kinetic shading devices or kinetic facade, because I know that the environment in GCC is not, it's very harsh. It's very harsh to accept any moving parts.
So fixed parts would be more suitable.
Yes, again, using shading devices is a second defense line. So the first defense line should be coming from the massing of the building itself. When it fails, or when there's some sort of a conflict between the required natural lighting and the solar gain, then you can add some shading devices to control that. But don't use it. For example, I have east-west facade. I will use vertical shading automatically by default. Doesn't work
Positioning
like that.
Of the building.
Doesn't work like that. You need to start with the massing, self-shading, proportion of the openings, and then when you fail to complete a proper design for certain areas, you can go to the shading devices, but not to jump to extra cost elements just by default.
Abdullah?
I just wanted to add, as the example we have all seen, I think, in Olaya, the King Fahd National Library, it's a very good design for passive dynamic shading technique that can be used, and it is to the regional, that what I am always advocating, that we should always follow regional techniques.
Correct.
Instead of importing or implementing foreign techniques to one region, which will just make it absurd, because we are losing the tradition and the culture. So I think King Fahd National Library is a great example in passive dynamic shading structures that can be implemented. And I think many architects here are starting to, regional architects are starting to take encouragement from those kind of techniques and implementing in their own design and complementing their own designs by using Arabic or traditional designs in the patterns.
That requires energy to save energy.
Yes.
So basically you have to look at what are you offering here to your clients, and does it make sense really, and what sort of operation that's required, what sort of maintenance that comes with it. Eventually you'll find that with little tricks and little designs, the orientation of certain elements of the facade, you can protect the facades that are not protected naturally by the masses. So we have not to ignore the fact most of our corporate projects and hotel projects right now, they're not going to accept from you as a designer to come up with windows anymore. Everybody wants actually views, everybody is dependent on natural light. And this is the challenge actually. When you talk about sustainable design, you have to increase your daylight and decrease the exposure of your facade to the natural element. This is where the trick and the innovation comes.
We saw this morning from Mika also this glass building, but the dynamic shading, let's say, were a bit internal, so there is no problem of dust or mechanical maintenance. It's more, it was in between a second skin, you said.
Yeah, this is something I want to add in general. We're talking about sustainable design, massing, natural design. We all love this, especially you as architects. But as Dr. Werner said in the morning, in 2050, I don't know what was the percentage, 70% of people will live in the city. So probably high-rise tower, okay? So a couple of capital market authority high-rise will come up. You have to design them.
And bigger windows, then, like you said.
Exactly.
More openings.
Yes, and then the question is definitely sustainability, sourcing local. What is my solid against vision? Do I have like fins outside, some kind of shading?
And we top it up with the skillship of the design, the supervision team, the contractor, the design, and the story.
Yes.
We don't have those working together. Honestly, we'll never build reality systems.
So, beside the natural and the sustainability discussion about massing, you're not massing a high-rise tower 400 meter, right? There will be not much massing on 400 meter high or 5, 6, 7, 800, whatever we are talking about, right? So the systems available The local sourcing allows us to do these high-rise towers. You may like it or not as an architect. It allows us to do it with a proper, let's say, green building rating, despite our discussion. I just want to say this.
But this is, I think, a very good point to stop, because it summarizes a bit the discussion about sustainability and allows us to open the floor for questions to our panelists. Please, you may feel free to. Yes, please. No? Okay. Any questions to the panelists?
Anybody with questions?
Michael, you said earlier, without the commissioning, you will never, on the end of the day, really get there. On how many of your projects in the Middle East was air leakage rate, for example, specified, old building air leakage test specified, and later for cost saving got cancelled? And how many did you actually do it?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I cannot honestly answer, because I tell you, compared to Europe, the number of projects where we are getting into the construction phase is very limited. Very limited, okay? Many, many times we are not even being associated in the construction phase. And if the client may push us to the main contractor, and the main contractor may push us to the fabricator, and what is at the end this kind of assignment? What is the value of the assignment? Of course, we are passing a PMU test, as you said. We may have an on-site horse test, but what is it related to the rest of it, okay? I can just remember a big project, 11 towers, a whole development, fabulous design, even association in the construction phase. I think the commissioning company, they stopped counting at leakage number 200. Okay, they stopped simply counting. I mean.
Any other questions? I'm happy to see still a full house after lunch. It's very good. If there are no more questions, I think you'll be happy to gain the time. I would like to thank our panelists for giving us from their experience. All of you, thank you very much.